And Diamond here with you on BBC Radio Berkshire. Now, this is something that I had no idea about, and you probably won't either. Currently, there are 4 times as many boys diagnosed with autism in the UK than there are girls. But is this down to more men having autism or poor diagnosis in women? Now, you see, I've known a lot about autism over the years, and I've always understood what the medics have always said, which is it happens more with boys than girls, and I've just accepted that. But there is this group now called Autism Women Matter, who are aiming to increase awareness of autism in women and girls, with the aim of the next generation getting faster diagnosis and therefore more help and understanding. Olley Edwards is with me. She's from Reading and is a co-founder of the group and has just come back from the United Nations to discuss this topic. In fact, you were in Geneva, weren't you?
That's
giving
right,
a speech about
on the
it.
7th of November.
Yeah. Your own story is fascinating in itself because you are a woman with Asperger's.
That's right.
Which, as we know, is on the autistic spectrum, which is the way we put it nowadays, I think. But you didn't know that?
No.
When you were growing up?
No. As a child, it was very much a lot of quirks, a lot of differences. I'm very lucky. I've got fantastic parents who just dealt with my differences.
Quirks and differences like what? OCD?
OCD was a problem.
That's obsessive-compulsive disorder for people listening.
Huge anxiety issues.
Just as a teenager?
Well, no, as a child as well.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, even...
I was going to say, as a teenager, you might expect that anyway, which is difficult to tell whether it's abnormal or not. But as a child, yes, you shouldn't be quite so anxious.
Yeah, my poor mother had to get a job at the nursery I went to. Then when I went to school, had to get a job at the school. Then my first job got a job at that job. It's real anxiety. But of course I masked it.
Yes.
Because you can't get along in society with that extreme anxiety. So I became the extrovert.
Yeah.
And it was a real tale of kind of being the extrovert and then coming home and withdrawing, which mentally, it really does take its toll. And by the time I was I was a teenage mum. And by the time I was in my late teens, I developed eating disorders, which are all kind of the comorbids of the actual, as we say, the petals rather than the root.
Yes.
Yeah, and they get recognised.
Yes,
but the root cause,
but the root cause doesn't.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We'll go on it. We'll later talk about why it seems to be recognised more in boys than girls. But you didn't have any diagnosis at all until your own daughter was diagnosed as autistic.
It happened very quickly. When my daughter's younger sister was born, she came in to see her sister in the postnatal ward and was causing a little bit of havoc, I'll put it politely. And one of the staff there said, "Oh, don't worry, my autistic daughter does that too."
Oh, so she recognised straight away?
Yeah.
This child is autistic.
She had an autistic daughter herself, a member of staff. But of course, I wasn't completely aware of that. So my daughter was very quickly, a few months, diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And then her younger sister, at just 2, was diagnosed with standard autism and some sort of...
Gosh, 2 daughters with it.
Yeah.
And is that at that point that you said to the doctor, actually, I might have it myself, and they looked into you?
Well, it wasn't until I realised that even in schools, I had teachers questioning me because, they were saying, "Oh, well, you can't possibly have 2 daughters with autism because it only happens to boys."
Yeah.
And it was a very scary time. I'd recently got divorced and felt very alone, and to not have that support from the professionals as well, because the professionals weren't aware of how differently girls can look. So it took research the whole globe. The National Autistic Society were fantastic, Anna Kennedy Online, and specialists in Australia. And they, spoke to me about, well, females can look differently. And as I looked through this profile of how females present, it was, flashes of my whole life coming back to me.
Okay, well, I don't know if you can boil it down to basics, but I mean, I've met a lot of autistic boys.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was interesting. Benedict Cumberbatch was just talking on the radio, I think this weekend, about, he's just playing Alan Turing in the new movie.
Yeah.
And it's now thought that Alan Turing was probably autistic as well, but again, never ever recognised. But boys present in one way, and that is quite well recognised, and it will be spotted, and people understand it. Why do you think girls present differently, and how differently do they present?
Girls can present very differently. I think they take on sometimes the role of the actress. They chameleon, they sponge up what they see around them. And I can remember my parents and other women I've spoken to said, well, she can kind of blend into a clique, and every clique that has no sense of self-identity, because it's a constant act of, okay, well, this is how we're acting in this situation, scanning, as you say, Benedict Cumberbatch, a bit like Sherlock Holmes. Let's scan the situation and act appropriately, and then go home and completely break down. So very, very good at masking, very, very good at acting the role for that situation.
So girls actually themselves may be better at spotting what's going on and trying to cover up, where boys maybe just don't do that.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
They've got the same condition.
Yes, it's the same triad of impairments, as they call it. The social imagination. And by social imagination, there are many people with autism that are great writers and singers and authors.
Geniuses, frankly. Some of them are, aren't they? Yeah.
There are some. And the problem with that is the social imagination that we're talking about is the understanding consequences. So you'll find, and my daughter, bless her, very, very bright, said to me, Mother, I've never met somebody with such a high IQ, but yet no common sense. And I thought that is the perfect...
That is very interesting, yes.
The perfect way to sum up a female with autism. You see these bright women that are constantly doing silly things, but it's just because they're not understanding the consequences of their actions. Yeah.
Well, in a minute, let's talk about the speech you gave at Geneva and what effect you hope it's going to have. It's 16 minutes past 10. Tony Braxton and Unbreak My Heart. It's 20 minutes past 10. Olley Edwards is with me. We've been talking about her life with Asperger's, actually.
That's right, yeah.
Which is a form of autism?
That's right, yeah. It's called a subgroup. One of the
subgroups. But you've got two daughters with autism or Asperger's?
One has Asperger's and one has autism.
I mean, it's thought, isn't it, that there is an autistic... we now know there is an autistic spectrum.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's almost getting to the point where, I mean... It's a matter of degree, isn't it? Could all of us be autistic to some degree, or...?
I'm not sure. I mean, there is a very clear triad of impairments that have to be met. But I think, we spoke to a gentleman called Bob Buckley in Australia, and we asked for, if the prevalence is this for males and that for females, what is the
prevalence for the population as a whole
that are undiagnosed, talking about females. And we did some maths, and I think it works out to about 240,000 undiagnosed women just in the UK.
Gosh.
And on a global scale, that is 17 million women who have gotten undiagnosed globally.
I mean, that's huge. You were telling us about what life was like for you, undiagnosed.
Yeah.
And the effort. You didn't know you were doing it because you were doing it intuitively. But the effort you put in all your young life to feeling a bit different, trying to gauge the world, trying to put on a face, and then coming home and, getting anxious about it, not surprisingly. Those undiagnosed females must be going through hell, really.
Yeah, I think...
And not knowing why.
Well, this is why a year ago we formed Autism Women Matter, myself and Monique Blakemore. The reason for doing so is to support these women that there's no support there for them. So it's very much that we will support their needs to maybe address a diagnosis if they feel they want an official one. Not everybody does, which is fine. But it's more about giving them their self-identity and some support and self-understanding. So it's quite a tricky thing for Autism Women Matter, because not only are we trying to help the undiagnosed women, we're also enabling and helping the professionals understand the undiagnosed women. So it's very much a two-way thing.
Presumably they were both professionals and people who are suffering from at Geneva when you were giving your speech. Well, who was in the audience?
Well, there was a lot of... To be honest with you, when it came to the speech, all I saw was my bullet points and a blur
you didn't
of anxiety.
Look at the audience in the eyes. No, I totally understand that.
But on the panel, we had a lady from France who was, again, diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome as an adult. We had Lydia, who is the head of the International Alliance for Women, and a lovely lady from New York called Dina Gassner. Again, she has autism, was diagnosed as an adult because she has autistic children, recognise the profile. Right. And when we were all sat there, we hadn't heard each other's stories before because we've come from different parts of the globe, and we all had exactly the same life pattern. It was,
Goodness me.
Yeah.
And you held it together quite well, you were saying, right through your speech. You said what you wanted to say until it got to one point, because one of your daughters wrote an open letter for you to read out.
Yes.
And you found that quite hard to say.
Yes, I was what I call uber professional until it came to my daughter's speech that she wanted to address to the UN, because basically I can talk about personal experience, what it's like to never have had that label but needing it.
Yes.
Whereas you need to try and see it from the other perspective. What about the children who are very lucky to have their autism diagnosis as a child, but they will never know what it's like to not have a label. So in my daughter's speech, she said, I'll never know what it's like not to be labelled, but I'll never know what confusion, misunderstanding and desperation feels like, and that she's utterly grateful. And at that point, I needed
That's
to
weird,
leave.
isn't it? My goodness, yeah. Without a label, you have no help, you have no support, and you're wondering what it is about you. But with a label, even if it's a helpful label, it's still a label.
That's right.
It's quite, it has its own problems. Gosh, it's interesting seeing it from that perspective.
Yeah,
on the other hand, at least with a label, you will get some help, love and support, and that's what we need to talk about next.
Absolutely.
We will do after a bit of Eric Clapton.
Radio Berkshire.
Berkshire News and Berkshire Stories.
With Anne Diamond. BBC Radio Berkshire.
Travel you trust.
As it happens.
And here he is with the travel news for you. And some of the roads have been absolute hell this morning. Here's Russell Holding. For us. And that was James Blunt and When I Find Love Again, here on BBC Radio Berkshire. Now, I'm Anne Diamond, and I'm talking to Olley Edwards from Reading, who's a co-founder of the group Autism Women Matter. We've been talking about the fact that it is fairly well recognised that autism is in boys, and there is a way of diagnosing it in boys. There doesn't seem to be a proper way of diagnosing it in girls at all. In fact, the first thing to do, presumably... Oh, come on, your microphone's not working. The first thing to do is presumably get the professionals to understand that it can happen in girls, and that when and if it happens in girls, it's going to present differently.
That's right, yeah. There needs to be a gender-neutral diagnostic tool. There is a fantastic tool called the DISCO, which the National Autistic Society use at the Lorna Wings Centre. But it's not only just about having that tool, it's about the professionals understanding the best way to interpret the use of that tool. So they do a lot of training there. But yeah, Autism Women Matter, we're very much trying to work with both professionals and with women who feel they have an undiagnosis.
Are the professionals willing to listen to you on this? I mean, because sometimes when you come up with something new for the professionals, which sort of is counterintuitive to what they've learned and what they've practiced for many, many years, they don't like hearing it.
Sometimes that can certainly be the case. What we're doing at the moment, actually, with Cambridge University, are running a research on autism women as parents. Because that's obviously another stigma. So we're Autism Women Matter on the advisory board for that. So we're very much in support.
Is there a danger that if some women get their diagnosis, they are autistic or Asperger's, they may, on the same hand, be deemed to be, well, maybe they're not quite fit parents then?
Very much so.
Eek.
Very much so, which is causing a lot of women to not go for a diagnosis. Again, the rates are going to look a little bit skewed. And more worryingly, if they feel that they do need support, not all do, but some may, they're very, very scared to approach social services in order to get some help.
Yes.
Because it's the stigma and a lot of fear. So we're trying to help with that too.
You can see the roll on as well, because there also may be a need, not all, not for all, but for some, for genetic counselling too. Because isn't it true that as time goes on, it looks as though there may be a genetic factor?
I think there may be a genetic factor, yeah.
You've got Asperger's and you've got 2 children with it.
Yes.
And you're coming across more and more people like you, aren't you?
Yes, that is very much the case. But I think there are some people that want to look at genetic counselling because they're seeking a cure. But we fully believe we're a strength-based group. So we really believe that the cure is actually within society understanding and supporting, the social model of disability.
OK, well, let's go to the next thing then. Hopefully the more women who have who are on the autistic spectrum get some sort of decent diagnosis. Obviously, that's good. But what is there? What can we offer as a society to those people in the terms of help and support? Is it worth getting a diagnosis?
I think for a lot of women, when they've got to the stage where they're in their 20s or their 30s, a lot of it is just purely, and it was very important that I got an official diagnosis rather than just thinking, okay, I'm one too, and personally, from my own experience, it was for that self-identity and to understand, okay, this is where my loopholes in my self-protection are. This is why I have vulnerability and naivety. And to have professionals to say to me, okay, well, here are some techniques, and to be able to have that ability to look after yourself.
It's almost about like being allowed to like yourself and being allowed to accept yourself.
And just understand
not
yourself.
fighting something.
And I think it's all the time you're searching for a baseline of certainty, be it in eating, calorie counting or OCD, you're looking for that baseline of certainty. And the minute you get that diagnosis, you've got your baseline of certainty.
We have, I think a lot of people listening will come to the same sort of thoughts that I have been. We have a great problem with a lot of young girls to do with eating disorders.
Yeah.
Their willingness to control, their over-anxiety, often depression, all linked up with that sort of thing. Do you think that is part of Asperger's or autism?
Definitely. Cambridge University have done some research into that, which is Googleable. And there is a link between anorexia eating disorders in males and females, and they score very, very high Asperger's traits.
It's not surprising to hear
very,
that.
Very high, yeah.
So what's next on the campaigning front?
Well, the next is we've only just got back and we thought, well, this is lovely and things might quieten down, but we've actually just a few days ago been invited to the Human Rights Forum in Marrakesh, which will happen before Christmas.
Wow.
So yes, that's huge. And, you know, Monique Blakemore, who's the co-founder of Autism Women Matter, is absolute dynamite. She really is. She's very, very professional and is able to make this change happen. And
so
it's
next
utterly
up,
grateful.
Marrakesh.
That's right, World Human Rights.
Talking about the human rights in the whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. This is going to take over your life, isn't it? As if you weren't busy enough.
I think I'm going to take up knitting afterwards.
I'm not sure whether that will help that much, but give it a go. Why not? Fascinating to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
I think what you've done is you've shone a light on something that I don't think most people knew was a condition.
Yeah.
Because we've been told for so many years it just doesn't happen very much with girls at all. It's mostly a boys thing. And here you are standing up and saying, hang on a minute, it may not be that way.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for coming in and telling us.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
Olley Edwards.